I am an educator and a researcher and an administrator supporting edge science fields with a particular interest in public scholarship, science communication, and exceptional experiences. I'm a professional member and executive director of the Parapsychological Association. I'm a community manager and full member of the Society for Scientific Exploration, and I'm also the founder of Public Parapsychology. And I also happen to be the chair of this symposium. So I imagine that the first half of the day would be focused on citizen science. But if you look at a description, it wasn't just about citizen science, it's also about participatory team science. And so I imagine the second part of our day being about that idea of participatory team science. And I somehow accidentally in the last year ended up fostering several participatory team initiatives. And I want to tell you the story of that, how that happened, because I think it's interesting and maybe others can learn something from it. So, first, let's talk about a definition of participatory team science. And it's a very simple one. It's public engagement in team science, presumably interdisciplinary team science. So it's when you are in an interdisciplinary team and you're including at least one member of the public. And folks have been doing this for years now. It's kind of a trending thing. It's not just for edge scientists. And we've found that it's promising, especially for addressing grand challenges such as addiction, cancer, global health, climate change, health disparities. Situations where we need all hands on deck are especially promising for participatory teams. And the reason why this works is because science is fundamentally a social enterprise. Social relationships and interpersonal transactions are essential to knowledge production. And effective collaboration with public stakeholders can help us address scientific challenges, especially the all hands on deck situations, in a new way. Unfortunately, the speaker who was supposed to be before me today had to cancel due to illness. And I think her talk, I was looking forward to that one because one of the reasons I invited her to join us is she is part of a group that is working on developing research projects for climate action. But the research teams have particular rules, and they go something like this. You need to have a senior scientist, an early career scientist, a climate scientist, a scientist who has nothing to do with climate science, a member of the public, and at least two teenagers. And I was really looking forward to hearing her explain the rationale for that and how that's working for her. I think that we've invited her to record her talk and disseminate it when she is feeling better. So hopefully we'll still get to hear from her at a later time. So I want to talk about how I accidentally ended up creating or helping to foster in several participatory teams. And it started with me, and I wear a lot of hats. I had my PA hat on, and I was having a conversation with a retired scientist who's also a donor. And he said that parapsychologists can continue their research for maybe a decade or two, but it will be for nothing if humans and most other species vanish under the pressures of global warming. I will say that this retired scientist also worked kind of adjacent to environmental scientist or environmental science, and he said that he really believed that to solve the problem that politicians can't do it, business and commerce can't do it, religions can't do it, an angry public can't do it. Our only real hope is using the underlying capabilities of psi. Strangely enough, since that conversation, I've had another climate scientist tell me the same thing. His idea was perhaps that we can utilize psi to transmute some of the atmosphere's CO2 and methane to something that is less lethal. And perhaps parapsychologists could be asked to redirect some portion of their efforts from the theoretical to the applied. At the time, the PA had done a symposium on ecology and parapsychology, and it had a lot of theoretical underpinnings. And I pointed out to this individual, but he was like, "No, we need to work on applying these things." So I took some time to think about it, and the idea of super psychics teleporting CO2 to wherever felt like a crazy idea. But as I started to reflect on it and think about it more, I realized given some of the things that we've already learned in parapsychology, which is not a young science, really, it's as old as psychology itself. Um, there's reasonable basis for at least exploring these ideas and giving it a try. And so I said, let me make a few phone calls. And then we ended up on a pretty interesting ride. Some support for this idea previous to this conversation, a couple books have come out. One called Subtle Activism by David Nichol and Greening the Paranormal, which was edited by Jack Hunter. And Subtle Activism discusses things like the Maharishi effect, global consciousness, like the Global Consciousness Project came into conversation in this book quite a lot. Things like the Big Ben movement or the Big Ben Minute. These are things that have demonstrably contributed to less suffering just by use of groups gathering and using their intent or meditation or meditating for a reason. There's reason to expect that it might actually transmit to like actual objective change in the world. Jack Hunter's Greening the Paranormal suggests that the paranormal self and the ecological self are kind of one and the same, that you cannot, or that there is some sort of correlation perhaps between spending more time in nature and also having more exceptional experiences. And so his book, which was an edited book, is full of a lot of really wonderful ideas on this front, and I highly recommend it. And then we do have an instance of at least one parapsychologist who has completed a project on climate action, and it was actually just published in the outcoming issue of Aperture, which I think was released earlier this week. And this is Julia Mossbridge. What she did was she worked with two atmospheric scientists who agreed to take the abilities of skilled intuitives seriously. And 6 intuitives responded to that call, and they asked about 10 questions to remote view on. One of those questions, for example, was, assuming we solve climate change in the future, describe the most crucial piece of information or technology needed to do so we can potentially take action in this direction. Really brilliant question. And the atmospheric scientists came away with some testable hypotheses. We also have another project in progress. This one, this is a grant that was awarded by the PA just before COVID. So presumably, I don't think they've started the project yet, but this is Dr. David Luke and Danny Caputi. Dr. Danny Caputi have combined forces. They're planning on doing a naturalistic experimental field pilot study testing the reported ability of Huichol shamans to manipulate local weather systems in northern Mexico. They're using a multi-methods approach, combining ethnography and parapsychological experimental field research design. They plan to explore the claimed ability to produce rain in a chosen dry location within a pre-specified time period. The researchers are going to calculate the probability of rain in that location using current forecasting models based upon available weather surveillance radar data from the time at which the challenge is accepted. And the hypothesis is that weather shamans will be able to produce rain on demand more often than it is expected by chance. So already there have been some efforts from the field of parapsychology to address climate. So basically, after making a couple of phone calls, I realized that there is some interest in this topic. And so the first thing I did was I asked to be a table host at a Psi Agora meeting. I think this one took, oh yeah, I have it on my slide. It took place in June 2021. And the Psi Agora, it's a lot like what you were experiencing earlier during the break. It was at Airmeet. The Psi Agora is where we have multiple tables, and those tables are usually branded with a topic. And the table host is kind of responsible for keeping conversation moving on that topic. And so I decided I'm going to be a table host on the topic of applying psi to climate change. Basically, let's roll it up the flagpole and then let's see who salutes it. Well, a lot of people actually came to this. It was a very popular topic. Afterward, even I was getting emails from people who were like ready to go, like, let's do this. So a couple of things that we came up with at this conversation. We realize climate change is a broad problem. And so while we like the idea of super psychics transmuting CO2, really the solutions to climate change or for climate action are going to be as varied as the problem itself. And the responses of Psi researchers are going to be unique based on what they're interested in, where their skills are, what it is that they want to do. And so we agreed that we would discuss this more at an upcoming SSEPA convention. And so that we did. So at the next convention in this past year, in July of 2021, by the way, we have another combined conference coming up June 23rd through 26th. Don't miss that. Had a pop-up meeting happen at this conference. And some of the Agora attendees came back, plus a few more people. And we got a little bit more serious about what we're doing. We decided we're going to start a Slack group to organize our efforts. And then they requested in the group that Public Parapsychology host. Public Parapsychology is it started as a blog that I founded in 2006. And now it has, in part because of this project, it had a reboot in the fall of 2021 as a community website. And for that, we came up with and the help of some editors, came up with a general mission statement and also a position statement. Now, the mission statement is that public parapsychology, its goal is to explore the art, technology, and science of various topics associated with exceptional experiences and phenomena collectively referred to as psi. Public parapsychology supports the discussion of parapsychological research in light of social values such as equality, justice, and freedom, ecological values such as global health and sustainability, and intellectual values through a constructive dialogue with and among students, citizen scientists, professional researchers, diverse communities, and political and cultural leaders. We wish to promote public scholarship by advancing parapsychological pursuits that are informed that inform and are informed by the public good, by boosting the development and transfer of knowledge and technology, educating the public about what career scientists do, and listening to the public about what research needs to be done. No small feat there. And then our position statement is this: Psi exists and it belongs to everyone. So what we decided to do in our Slack was to do something in several stages. And because I know event management pretty well, thanks to my work with the PA and the SSE, we decided we would do an event that would have a workshop, an ideathon, and a collaborative sprint. And the workshop took place on December 17th. And you can see here who participated, which is primarily people who actually showed up to the meetings that I was talking about. And so I gave a talk on identifying the problem and how we respond. Jack Hunter, who's the author of Greening the Paranormal, came and gave a summary of his book and what he's currently working on. Alex Alvarez is a biologist, and so he shared his perspective on the question, is Gaia alive? Michael Daw, he is a PhD candidate, University of Northampton, and he was really taken by the subtle activism book, and so I asked him to do a brief talk on that. Julia Mossbridge joined us to talk about her study. David Luke was not able to join us to talk about what he was working on, but his student Pascal Michael came and had a really brilliant talk about psychedelia and interspecies transcommunication, which was pretty informative. Mark Bacuzzi gave two talks, one on the ethical considerations of applying psi to environmental protection, and another on applying non-traditional psi-based, I think that's cut off, I think the word is technology. Maybe Mark can help us with that in the chat. And then Ramses, who will join us later, talked about the ideathon and collaborative sprint, and we tried to encourage people to continue to join us throughout the rest of the activities. We did have something like 80 or 90 people show up to our workshop. Its purpose was to just cover the theoretical, ethical, and practical issues. And then at the ideathon, which was the next day, we expected there would be something of a funnel. And so I think we had about approximately 20 people who came to the ideathon, and almost pretty similar number that came to the collaborative sprint, which took place 2 weeks later. So, okay, so in my talk, I not a climate scientist, but I didn't have any on board, and so I first discussed a little bit about public parapsychology, and then I decided I would be the spokesperson for the current state of climate, and I took my information from what I think are the best sources, and the best most recent source was the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their sixth assessment report, and I gave about a 10-minute presentation on that report. This slide, which I lovingly stole from them, which we're allowed to steal them. It was one of the highlights of what you can expect to have in climate change: extreme heat, heavy rainfall, drought, fire weather, ocean warming, acidifying, losing oxygen. Not a pretty picture. And then another statement is that to limit global warming, strong, rapid, and sustained reductions in CO2, methane, and other greenhouse gases are necessary, which would not only reduce the consequences of climate change, but also improve air quality. Now, one of the problems I saw with that report was it is full of problems, but it is not full of any solutions. They are promising that later this year they're going to have a report with solutions. But to find mainstream solutions, I had to go to another source. And so I decided the next best thing, because I'm well acquainted with the AAAS, the Parapsychological Association is an affiliate of the AAAS. So I wanted to look at what they are doing. And they have this wonderful initiative called How We Respond. And it's all about the various different ways that participatory science teams are coming together and responding to climate issues, mostly on a very local level. And it's a very large report, but has a nice, like an executive summary. And what it boils down to for the AAAS is the responses is that since kind of what we figured out at the SciAgora, since climate change can have broad range of impacts, the best responses rely on a similarly broad range of science. So physical, social, economic analyses. This is not in the report, but parapsychology could have a seat at the table here. We know that there's going to be regional differences in how people are experiencing climate change. And then even in responding to climate change, there's two major ways to do it. One is adapting to the changes that are happening or expected to happen in the future. We call this climate adaptation, or limiting the extent of changes that will occur by reducing or eliminating greenhouse gas emissions, which we call climate mitigation. And the AAAS says that the best responses involve both approaches. And so together, scientists and community members are seeking resources, sharing expertise, and collecting and using data sets that are relevant for their community. And the very strong citizen science and participatory team science is happening at the AAAS on this. Particularly useful when it comes to vulnerability assessments, because we are finding that aged populations that other non-white cultural communities can be even worsely impacted by these changes. And so I think we already have a link to the report in the chat. I think it's really useful if you're thinking about either joining or creating a project such as this. So bringing it back to parapsychology, so the question is how is there a parapsychology of climate mitigation? We decided when we had our workshop event, I wanted to be as accessible as possible. And so it was a pay what you want type of scheme, and people were very generous. And so going into the workshop, we were able to create a X Prize team. And the X Prize is the purpose of it is a combination of the X Prize and the Musk Foundation on carbon sequestration. And I was like, you know what? Let's go ahead. Let's throw our hat in the ring. That is one possibility future for sci research, but it's not the only way to look at the problem. So some of the questions: can one or more humans endowed with maximal psi abilities alter the character of the atmosphere, permuting greenhouse gases to something or something's less dangerous? But more importantly, should they? Can psi practitioners affect weather systems generally? Can large groups of meditators subtly affect our planetary emergency? Could there be an app for that? And so something that became really useful for this workshop is I decided to do this for myself, and because I was presenting about climate change, and I'm not a climate scientist, I did not want to take questions, and I had other people who were presenting on things that were not their primary line of study, and they didn't want to take questions. And so we did something called, for at least some of the speakers, we did a reverse Q&A, and I found this really effective for starting to bring the teams together. So at the end, I didn't take questions. We opened up the social lounge, which you've seen an example of that, and I asked people to take a table and 2 questions. 1, how have you experienced or encountered the effects of climate change in your region? Call that an icebreaker. And then each table was, there were 4 tables for each of these questions. Can you imagine ways in which ESP might be employed for climate mitigation? Ways in which extrasensory perception might be employed for climate adaptation, ways in which PK might be employed for climate mitigation, ways in which psychokinesis can be employed for climate adaptation. So we already got 2, quote unquote paranormal modes of action, 2 kinds of climate strategies, mix and match. Let's brainstorm. Let's get wild. And that was kind of a fun session. So yeah, by the end of the day, the idea is that everybody would get some kind of grounding on what we know so far, what are the issues, and so that our population would be ripe for Ramses to take it away, which he's going to do for us right now.
Thank you, Annalisa. So yeah, I want to share a little bit about the other 2 phases or other 2 days that this 3-day event englobed, and that will be covered in the ideathon and the collaborative sprint. So can you go to the next slide, please? Awesome. So a goal, as it was mentioned in the, or it was printed in the slide before, I mentioned in a comment that a goal without a plan is just a wish. And how does executing a citizen edge science event look like? And basically, it's a lot of Google Forms, but the real value lies in the people taking the time and effort to fill those forms and commit to the work involved in it. So principally, leaders with the courage to propose and commit to ideas, not knowing if that ideas would be backing up, and volunteers not knowing what to do or what to expect, but with certainty that doing something is way better than doing nothing. So in the ideathon, in this project hosted by Public Parapsychology, the ideathon was designed to create or to join teams around ideas submitted by these leaders and enriched by the workshop held on the previous day, which Annalisa has told us a little bit about. In the ideathon started with a speed networking session that, like we did today, and that Annalisa already mentioned, allowing participants to break the ice and chat for a limited amount of time. This is important for this type of projects, for having at least a little rapport or a little of a background of the people that you will be encountering down the line, and having at least a little bit of knowledge of what are their expectations, their ideas, or why are they joining, where are they coming from. After the speed networking session, it was followed by a session called the presentation of ideas, which or where leaders who already submitted their ideas through these forums would pitch their vision to the audience of volunteers, giving a quick oversight of what the idea or their particular idea involved. Afterwards, there was a table hopping kind of phase where leaders sat at their respective tables and volunteers had the opportunity to discuss with them and learn more about their ideas. This was a 2-phase session where every volunteer needed to go to every table, at least for a little amount of time, and ask some few questions. Afterwards, there was supposed to obtain at least the top 2 options that they wanted to participate in, and then again sit in the respective tables with the leaders and discuss more profoundly the implications, their visions, the how to achieve this type of ideas, or at least began to design a general outline about that. So after that was on, and the volunteers have decided to have a decision in what idea they wanted to participate in, there was a quick processing of this volunteer decision in a break. and the announcement of the initiatives and the respective team members was made. Finally, the team members sat for the first time as a team and worked to define the name of the initiative, or at least the initial name. It has changed a little bit for some teams, at least. The main objective of the protocol, the main objective of the protocol, business idea, or technical application, basically the document, the baseline document, and the definition of 3 members' roles required for the next event, which was the collaborative sprint, which was held on January 8th. So these 3 roles was the manager, the ambassador, and the scribe. And the manager was responsible for following up with the commitments made by each member. The ambassador was responsible for the interaction with public parapsychology and other teams, especially important in the collaborative sprint. And the scribe was responsible for the documentation of the project and the protocol. It's worth noting that from here onward, the people that were project leaders or volunteers were just regular team members. So even the project leaders were not required to take one of these 3 particular roles. Starting from the point that even if they started the idea, it was a team idea now. So no one owned it in that sense. So everyone could have a generalized vote about that. The thing that hasn't been presented yet is how the collaborative sprint was designed. And this was the final phase of the whole event of climate action, or consciousness-based practices for climate action. And its main objective was to end up that day, or that each team ended up with that day, with a scientific protocol, a business proposal, or a technical analysis. Then again, basically the baseline document required for their particular project or their development of that idea. The activities to reach that objective were designed on Miro, which is an interactive and infinite whiteboard where all participants could edit at the same time. There are some limitations, but basically you can have a lot of people writing stuff in that whiteboard. It looks a little bit like this, which may seem a little bit chaotic, but it was hopefully kind of straightforward. And I'll show you some of the elements that were involved in this. Okay, so each team had their own template to work with, and each template had all the elements needed to work and sprint toward their project definition, so there weren't additional sessions or interruptions to needed to define them. Elements like the starting time, the activity's name and duration, and a space or template or widget to develop and write on them was already set before the event started. Elements like post-it notes, text boxes, forms to be filled were already there, so they could have all the templates ready so they can begin working right away. This helped each team to self-regulate and advance at their own pace, and also as a repository for documentation and future references, which seem to have been used even after the collaborative sprint was finished, which is very nice. A sprint was divided in different steps, and the step 1 and 2 were the pitch creation and presentation. And all these activities that I will discuss right now were designed for the set objective was for the team members to try to fill them up, try to solve all of the ones they can in the limited time that they were given. And but it's more important the journey than the actual activity per se. In any way, I'll return to that in a moment. The step 1 and 2 was the pitch creation and presentation, and a sales pitch was developed, or was supposed to be developed and presented to a fictitious group of stakeholders, which would be the other teams. And that particular set of slides should include the project's scope and the needs. And there was this 3-phase design on it, so they could document it and work around the ideas on how to present a sales pitch of a project that they haven't even started to define yet. The step 3 was the opportunity discussion. After every team presented their sales pitch to the other teams, each team would need to discuss and document for 10 minutes the opportunities identified for the other team's projects. So acting as stakeholders, they would try to find these limitations, these opportunities, this feedback that would be hopefully useful for the other teams, and it would be discussed in the next activity. As I mentioned before, one of the members' roles defined in the ideathon was the ambassador. And for the step 4, which was the ambassador hopping, this ambassador would represent an important stakeholder, like an investor, a company director, an executive researcher, etc. that would confront the other team's ideas with the limitations and feedback and opportunities noted by his team members, the ambassador's team members, as well as possible collaboration between teams. So that way, there was an adversarial or controversial point to be made, an antagonic point to be made, so they could reflect even more on the ideas they were settling. The step 5 involved the process identification, where each team member would list the stakeholders and risks of their project and write it down in the template, obviously helped by the feedback obtained in the step before. The step 6 was the roadmap development, where each team would have a template of a roadmap, and they would try to create a chronogram for their particular project or idea, allowing them to visualize the effort required as a collective to achieve their particular goal. After the tasks were defined in this roadmap, there was a step 7, which was a commitment definition, where, guided by the roadmap, they would design or define the tasks and responsibilities that each member would be following or taken care of in the following weeks or months of the project to be for the next steps of the project. It's also worth noting, and that's well, the final step involved finally the presentation of the general outline of each project to other teams, and to obtain a final feedback of the event for the next steps. But as I mentioned earlier, there wasn't enough time actually for each team to develop and fill all these templates and these activities, even though 30 or 40 minutes for each step would seem to be enough. I think many of the people here would agree that having people to agree in in just 1 or 2 lines may take even hours. So these steps weren't designed for them to fill them up, all of them, but were just designed for helping the teams to answer all the questions that were planned all the way. The real objective of the sprint was to have activities that help them reflect and analyze the main aspect of every project. Because even if it's a scientific research, a commercial approach, technical design for an application, for example, it seems that they all share based elements, which are the objective, the scope, the needs and limitations, the stakeholders identification, the risks, and possible collaborations to all of them. So it was designed more to reflect on this than to actually set on paper or on stone every aspect of this. With this final event completed, or this phase, the 3 initiatives that were born from this had a clearer path on where to go and how to advance, hopefully. But Annalisa will tell us right now more about what are these initiatives and what are they working on at the moment.
I'm just going to add that the collaborative sprint was intense, because it's like, answer these big questions with these 5 people you just met and do it in the next 30 minutes. But strangely enough, it worked, because I'm going to tell you the spoiler alert, all these projects are still working. And I know, like, at least one team that I was on, we didn't get to have our first meeting until about a month after the event, and then being able to go back to our Miro board was really useful. And I still find that even though we had to make really quick decisions, um, some of that stuff still sticks. Like, we looked back on and realized that that vision that we had to come up with as a new group, thinking on our feet, is still pretty much what we're doing. So there was some magic involved in that sprint setup, and I think it really worked. So my 2 cents. Okay, so these are the resulting initiatives. One of those is is a team that is after designed with the X Prize in mind. I don't know if we'll ever get around to actually applying or doing a final report there, but it was that kind of idea of CO2 sequestration using psi. And we have an abstract in consideration for the upcoming SSEPA conference with the title, An Exploration of Air CO2 Sequestration Using Consciousness-Based Interventions for Climate Action. And we have actually figured out roughly the protocols for the experiment that we're going to do, which is exploratory. Basically, we're going to look at levels of CO2 along with temperature, humidity, air pressure, and other variables which will be monitored in several airtight chambers. I'm going to get to a graphic about this in a moment. Enclosure, light accessibility, and temperature will also be controlled outside of the chambers. We will select participants with a pre-screening process, likely, using psychometric scales and considering demographic parameters. And the experimental design will also include a brief guided training developed for the experimental task and a web application for experimental trials and data collection. And we are currently drafting grant proposals. And so it's going to look a little bit like this. We will have 3 airtight chambers. One is a target chamber, a receiver chamber, and a control, which will be in an enclosure cooler that is light, tight, and temperature controlled. And there will be data taken at 2 samples per second into a USB hub, which will be saved on a laptop using custom software, documenting all the sensor readings with a timestamp. And then for the actual procedure, it is going to take place online. I think we're going to go with automated. So there will be a participant onboarding, pre-screening, and informed consent. And then they'll be tasked with the PK task of asking them to teleport CO2 molecules from the target box to the receiving box. It will be a very, very short task. We'll follow with a survey of demographic and psychometric information, and then that'll be that. And we might talk about this more in the Q&A. A third group was the subtle activism group. And their lead was a PhD student at the University of Northampton. And what they came up with was a qualitative research and practice project. Now, I just checked in with this group yesterday. There's a group of 6 that meet about every 3 weeks, and they go on Zoom, and they go into a deep meditative space together. From there, they listen as a group to what's going on with the earth and what they can do energetically in the moment to support, hold that process in an open-hearted, non-forced way. These sessions are recorded, and potentially they might become a study. I don't know where the group is with that, but the original idea is that participants would be interviewed throughout the program to understand their motivations, techniques, and subjective experiences, and possibly anticipated likely effects. This would be supplemented with self-completed experiential diaries to note subjective experiences and feelings, and the resulting analysis will help inform future activities and projects. I think the goal of this group, it's complete opposite of the carbon sequestration group, because we have a goal. We're going to go get the carbon. We'll do something else with it. This group is like, I want to listen to the planet about what the planet needs. And I think that these are both very valuable projects. And then there's a third one. And they've named themselves Collective Intent Tech. That will probably stick. And their goal is to create a mobile app that allows users to collectively focus intent to address a variety of climate change mitigation and adaptation possibilities. The idea is basically amounts to event hosting. So I have, sadly, here a picture of the current event that we're experiencing right now, the Arizona wildfires. Presumably what this app would do would be, okay, let's make it rain in Arizona. And so somebody can host the event. They could say on Sunday at noon Eastern, let's all put our collective intent on making it rain. Very, very simple thing to do. The app, though, I'm part of this team, and I'm not a IT professional at all. So I'm learning just how much work goes into every single phase of creating that app. And so we had our last meeting just a couple weeks ago, and we're presently working on the wireframe and the color scheme and the graphical content for this app. Everybody working on it is a volunteer. So we have IT professionals, artists, parapsychologists. What's really cool about this, though, is because we have parapsychologists into the build of the app, we are doing something that could potentially provide useful data for users who are willing to share their data. And we intend for that to be open access and probably uploaded to some sort of open data website. And so that is the projects, and like I said, still ongoing. And so finally, I just wanted to comment for a couple minutes on future possibilities. The 2 major things that we're facing right now, one of them is funding. The reality is that, as in parapsychology, we're used to doing things on the cheap because we've had to. And so for all these projects, the actual like materials and that we need to complete them are not very expensive, but we are dealing with a lot of volunteer hours and a lot of volunteer time. And so when you have people working in their free time, um, it's going to be slower than if you had paid professionals working on it around the clock. And so to that end, I think probably a next step for us is to probably have public parapsychology host some kind of crowdfunding to see if we can get some financial support for these projects. And I feel like I'm forgetting something. Ramses, am I forgetting anything?
I think that's a very good general output of how it started. Where are we now? Almost 1 year after the main contact, and yeah, what I would mention about that it has impressed me the most is that almost all the 20 persons that were at the ideathon and the collaborative sprint are still working on right now. They're really committed, and as you said, it's a lot of volunteer hours and a lot of self-regulation and self-organization because they are not in funded by a particular lab research or within an organization, but just a really group of people, citizen uh, scientists, not real scientists, but yeah, people with real scientific background, really committed to this. And seeing them working still to the day without funding, meeting every week, seems to be a real possibility and a really hopeful possibility for the future.
And I now I remember the thing that I forgot, which is that, we spent some time working on this formula, the workshop, ideathon, sprint. And I think this can be useful for quickly creating new initiatives in other areas where there isn't research yet. It can be good for creating more participatory teams. And I know as a founder of public parapsychology, if I would be keen to doing this again on this or other topics where we need just a quick seeding of community support and new ideas.
I would agree, and also my a few cents on that is that the advantage of using, for example, Miro as a template is that anyone can request those. It can be just copy and pasted, and there you go. There's a template for working, and I think that's also the good part that was reflected in this. A research proposal went or was born from this. A technical application for an app was born from this, and a general movement or not necessarily a business application, but a general outline of how the subtle activism group will be working was also born from this. So it kind of reflects that the template at least works for baselining the first steps or the general vision of any project. So hopefully someone or if someone would like to just take the template and implement them themselves, just contact us, and I think we'll be pretty happy to share that with you.
Yeah. Anyhow, I'm proud of what we did. I feel like we have a lot of creative solutions, and just like I was saying, what we predicted is that the problem would is just as diverse as the researchers, and yeah, they definitely. We couldn't have three projects that are more different, really, but yet complement each other in strange ways. So um, I think that's it for our talk. Then I'm happy to take questions. Ramses, will you stay on the stage with me?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Awesome. Let me get rid of this and let's see what we got. I am inviting people to raise their hands, especially anybody involved in the projects who want to maybe say a little bit more about them. But we do have a couple of Q&A questions. So I'm going to show one here from William Beatty. Yes, are there any RV results for perceiving 30 plus years of future tech solutions? We can RV lunar electrolysis, solar cells, and underwater city conducive Greece. So why not learn some successful tech solutions to climate change? In other words, how do future power plants work? So I'm really grateful that Julia's study finally came out in the past week or so, because that paper is actually rich with asking these kinds of questions. And Also, since starting this project, we got an offer from another person who is a leader in the remote viewing community, more or less inviting us to tap those resources again, for these kinds of questions. But as far as what our teams are doing, we don't have any results along those lines.
Yeah. Also, just a comment. I posted in the chat the paper or the link to Aperture from IRA, where you can get more information about that. So maybe there's some good answers or insights in there.
We have a question from Beatrice, and I'm having trouble understanding this one, so I'm gonna invite her to stage if she feels like coming. But the question is, if psi can affect climate change, is it not difficult to fight with potential psi effects arising from the huge media attention, often scaring people, to climate change that could be in action? And do we have a raised hand yet? There she is. Hi.
Hello.
Help me out with this question.
Yes, well, I think I didn't write it very well. I'm just thinking about like media is reporting a lot about the climate change. So there's a lot of fear and a lot of emotion about the climate change, like that in 30 years we are going to have a completely destroyed planet. And I'm wondering, like, now, if you have this sentiment very strongly spread among a lot of people, are we not going to have also like assuming that psi can influence this, are we not also going to get a component of this acting out? And will it be easy to do anything with psychics if you have a complete mass of the whole planet in fear that might also be contributing in the same way, adding a big factor? That's what I'm wondering.
There's all kinds of influences that are going to be out of our control. You know, I know that there's a lot of fear about climate change, but I'm also, when I was advertising this talk, ran into a lot of climate denial.
Even in psychic believer groups.
Yeah, and that was my first taste of that. And there might even be people in this audience who don't think that climate change is, at least not caused by humans. So I feel like there's so many different conflicting ideas right now, that it's. But I think you're right that I feel like fear does have an impact, and so if you have a large consciousness of fear, that that can make the situation worse.
I was reading about, for instance, like before I was going to get my vaccine, my booster. I read that if one is very scared of getting side effects from the booster, you're like tripling the probability that you get the side effects from the booster. So I went and got my booster and got corona at the same time. So
yeah, it is true that things like this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, or a bit of a nocebo effect.
Just
yeah.
Also, even though I think the question is very on point, and also I would recommend Mark Boccosi's presentation on that particular workshop regarding ethical considerations, because there's a lot of questions regarding that part that are involved. I think also, or I think all the vision right now is try to actually see if these projects can actually make an impact, if they can work as a proof of concept initiatives. So I think we need to keep those questions in mind, but I also think that if we just saturate with all the non-locality or temporal properties of consciousness, we might not even be able to start if we try to consider all those in research protocols or in the initiatives that we're that are advancing right now.
Yeah, something I was concerned about starting off with this is that if we come up with consciousness-based interventions that work, does that now mean that people think they can just, stop recycling and sit on their butts because the super psychics are going to take care of it? There's all kinds of angles for this. I think Mark called it slacktivism. Would we be encouraging that? So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions, but I feel like we need to explore if this works or not. And it's like right now it's literally 3 sealed boxes in a cooler. it's where we're starting. So I guess we'll see how it develops. But I feel like too what we're doing is also being well tempered by the subtle activism group, because they are there to listen.
I also want to maybe mention for the record that even though there's not many literature or research approximations to move some elements or particles from one space to another by not physical means. There are still at least some case reports and research documentation and intents for trying to do things as this. I mean, the Amiramiden case by Stanley Krippner, the work done with let me got it with I don't know his name. It was in I mean, it's a Chinese practitioner that was studying Shang Bosheng. I don't know how to pronounce that, but who was studied in the 1990s, producing teleportation from one object to another in research facilities in China. In this psi research the golden decade, let's say, that were pretty interesting. I mean, there's not many foundations for this, but there are at least some few, and I think that's worth exploring. I just wanted to mention or to pitch that in there.
Did we answer your question, Beatrice?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Answered. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.